Pokemonth!
Gotta watch 'em all, gotta watch 'em all. Pokemonth!
I need to make something clear. My relationship with Pokemon is much more subdued than it used to be. I'll still pick up the games every once in a while, but the release of the third movie marks the point where I was pretty much over it. So whenever I get a request to review Pokemon Heroes or The Rise of Darkrai, my response tends to be no. Simply because I don't have an attachment to those movies. But sure enough, those comments keep coming in, so I got to thinking, why not just do short-form reviews of all the Pokemon movies? Because there's like 15 of them, they're expensive, and half of them feature a voice cast I can't stand listening to.
Pikachu, you can't give up! Pikachu, you can do it!
Veronica Taylor, you are not. But then I thought, why not just spend a month reviewing the 8 movies dubbed by 4Kids? And do it in October, because X and Y comes out this month and it's topical. Then top the whole thing off with a cheesy pun and some After Effects. I've got 8 movies to review and 31 days to do it, so let's kick off Pokemonth with Pokemon the first movie. A title as uninspired as it is arrogant. We open with a group of scientists as they manage to clone the legendary Pokemon Mew, thus creating Mewtwo, the world's most powerful Pokemon, who immediately has an existential crisis and blows a ton of crap up because he refuses to be a slave to the humans who created him. Instead, he decides to create a new world in his own image by luring a handful of Pokemon trainers, Ash and company included, to his private island. There, he creates a clone army from their Pokemon, leading to an all-out battle between the clones and the originals to see who is the superior race. It would be an understatement to say this movie was a huge deal. Not just because of the hype surrounding it, with the Burger King toys and the soundtrack featuring some of the biggest pop stars of the day, singing songs that had nothing to do with the movie itself, but because it really gave Pokemon fans something they'd never seen before. It teased new Pokemon, it crossed over with the show, it was dark as all hell with Mewtwo committing a mass murder in the first 10 minutes! Even the battle it promised, Mew versus Mewtwo, was enough to get kids excited. It was like, holy crap, that thing that lives in that cave versus that thing that lives under that truck. I know you're down there. For many fans, this is easily one of the best. Top 5, no question. And yet the movie's only managed a 14% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is the lowest score given to any Pokemon movie. And speaking objectively, yeah, that's pretty justified. This movie was obviously made for fans, meaning anybody who didn't already follow the show couldn't get anything out of it. With that in mind, it's pretty much pointless to take an outsider perspective into account, but speaking as a fan, this movie still has a lot of problems. For starters, you can tell 4Kids was still trying to find their groove when it came to dubbing the show. Sure, they added some decent jokes.
I didn't know Vikings still existed!
They mostly live in Minnesota!
But they constantly misidentify Pokemon.
There goes Alakazam!
There's also an edit in here that makes the conflict way too simple by trying to make Mew seem like the good Pokemon and Mewtwo the bad Pokemon, when really Mew is just as much to blame for the super violent battle that ensues.
Mew says you don't prove anything by showing off a lot of special powers, and that a Pokemon's real strength comes from the heart.
Actually, he said clones are an abomination of nature and therefore have no right to exist. Yeah, Mew's kind of a racist. And questionable translation aside, everything sort of goes downhill once they get to the island. The movie has a decent setup, and Mewtwo is a great villain. His motivation is understandable, and he definitely leaves an impression. The kind of impression that makes you scream like a tiny baby child in front of all your friends who you invited to see the movie with you for your birthday. The movie just doesn't do a great job of following through in the second act. You ever notice how after Mewtwo clones all the trainers' Pokemon, the trainers all stop taking action? They all just sorta stand around. They don't even show personal attachment to their Pokemon when this infamous scene comes up.
Pokemon aren't meant to fight. Not like this.
Oh yeah, setting each other on fire is perfectly fine, but biting, that goes too far. Then there's Ash's self-sacrifice, that, while shocking for a first-time viewer, is also really contrived. It's not foreshadowed, there's almost nothing building up to it, it's pretty much only there for the shock value. And it's only cheapened further when he's brought back to life by a Deus Ex Machina that makes no freaking sense. Unless, of course, you remember one line of dialogue delivered by this woman.
In their sorrow, the water of their tears somehow restored the lives lost in the storm. But there are no Pokemon tears today. Just waters which no one can survive.
Who is this person? And from there, in the wake of Ash's selfless act, we get what fans and critics alike consider to be this film's greatest flaw. Mewtwo sees the error of his ways and erases everyone's memory, making the message that fighting is wrong completely pointless. But does it really? Obviously this was written in so the show could carry on as usual, but the issue of contradicting the message only really comes up if you think this is Ash's story. Which it isn't, it's Mewtwo's story. Sure, Ash, Misty, and Brock are here, but Mewtwo's the one driving the action, and the lesson is ultimately his to learn.
I see now that the circumstances of one's birth are irrelevant. It is what you do with the gift of life that determines who you are.
The other pitfall here is thinking the movie's message is about violence. That theme is definitely present, they spend an entire minute drilling it into your head. But the real message here is that you aren't defined by your origins. The movie begins with Mewtwo questioning his purpose and ends with the conclusion that your value is based on the choices you make, which is actually a very mature message for a kid's movie. The problem is it gets upstaged by an anti-violence PSA, which is far less subtle and thus sticks out more prominently. With that in mind, the lazy plot device at the end is just that. Though the hypocrisy regarding violence is still there. Even if you buy the attempts to separate the average Pokemon battle from Mewtwo's race war, this movie also has a scene in which Ash assaults a Pokemon. Oh, but that's okay, because he's the villain. So yeah, the first movie is definitely a flawed movie, and I wouldn't even say it's one of the best, but it's still enjoyable and definitely memorable. The critics may have hated it, but that didn't stop the movie from being a huge financial success, meaning only a few months later, American audiences would head back to the theaters for Pokemonth the Movie 2000. Next time on
Pokemonth!
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. Now while I still got you here, go ahead and answer me a question. Which Japanese anime cat monster thing do you like more, Mew or Mewtwo? Leave your answer in the comments and you just might see it featured on the next episode of Pokemonth. If you like what you just saw, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Then maybe follow me on some of the fancy social medias all the kids are talking about these days. And be sure to visit geekvision.tv and theagonybooth.com for more reviews like this one. Go on, do it! Or I'll be forced to loop this image of Pikachu slapping himself over and over again. You think I'm enjoying this? I'm not, and neither is he. You have the power to stop this, so go! Click the thing!